Who is the next league-winning wide receiver in 2022? Who's this year's Justin Jefferson, this year's Tyreek Hill, this year's Devontae Adams, this year's CeeDee Lamb, or this year's A.J. Brown? We all probably know that hitting on a league-winning running back is a big deal and can really vault you ahead of your league mates, but a league-winning wide receiver, a 20-plus point per game wide receiver, can be the perfect anchor for your team as well. So in this video, we're going to identify which wide receivers have the ceiling, who has, a high floor, who doesn't have a high ceiling, who's risky, who's safe. Going to break down the top 36 wide receivers in Underdog ADP and go through them case by case to determine if they have what it takes to be a league-winning wide receiver. If you enjoyed this video at any point, if you feel like you got some value from it, leave a like, subscribe if you're new around here. Now let's get into it. So I'm sure you guys know that some people define league winners differently than I do. Some people qualify it as like the late round sleeper that helps your team win a championship. But for me, a league winner is somebody that you draft in the early round, like, Justin Jefferson last year, Tyreek, Devontae Adams, CeeDee Lamb, A.J. Brown. You drafted these guys early on and they hit big. They were exactly what you wanted them to be. They gave you, 16, 18, 20 points per game in PPR. The point of this video basically is to take a holistic view of past wide receiver league winners. So guys that have gone over 20 points per game with a minimum of 12 games played in PPR formats, and then measure their peripherals, so things like volume, touchdowns, the offense that they played in, the quarterback that they played with, their target competition, stuff like that, against the current top 36 wide receivers in ADP to determine who has the type of ceiling that we're looking for that makes them a great early round pick. So history is our best indicator for these future breakouts. It's surprising to me that every fantasy channel doesn't do this for every position like we do over here. My early round wide receiver strategy is different than it is at running back. In the running back video, you guys heard me talk about the fact that I'm, fading safe plays, right? Because there is no such thing as a safe running back in the early rounds because running backs get injured at a very high rate. It's up near 30%, where it's down near 20% for wide receivers. So the fact that you get less likely of an injury, outcome for a wide receiver, it makes me more likely to take a guy that is a safe projection or a clean projection. So while I'm only drafting guys with high upside in the early rounds at running back, I'm totally cool swinging for upside at other positions and drafting safe wide receivers if that's your draft strategy. If you can project a guy for, a back-end wide receiver 1 ceiling, high-end wide receiver 2 ceiling in the early rounds, and you're already getting your upside from your running back that you drafted or your other wide receivers that you drafted, that's totally fine with me. So in this video, we're going to be weighing everything from talent to volume to situation, potential. It all matters. And I think a lot of the big mistakes that people make in fantasy is only weighing one thing heavily, like a player's talent, for example, or because he's going to get volume, for example, and vice versa. Some people only hold one part of somebody's profile against them, like, their team isn't going to throw the ball enough, or maybe their quarterback is not very good, or whatever the case is. So we're going to factor in everything and talk about what matters and who projects the best. So as I mentioned, we're going to take the averages of past league winners from 2013 to 2022 at wide receiver who finished with at least 20-plus PPR points per game and played at least 12 games or more. There has been 29 players to do so. You guys can see them on the screen. Last year, Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, and Devontae Adams did it. In years past, it's been guys like Antonio Brown and Julio Jones, DeAndre Hopkins, Brandon Marshall, Odell Beckham Jr., etc. The names on this list were true difference-making wide receivers. They were guys that carried people to fantasy championships. Anything in green indicates something that they were above average in. Anything in yellow indicates something that they were about average, and then red being below average. And again, we're using a sample of only elite fantasy options. So even though, 8.5 targets per game in 2018 for Tyreek Hill was a very good number, it was below average relative to the rest of these wide receivers here. So in PPR leagues, these are the guys that can really anchor your team. In standard leagues, not as much, but definitely most of us play in PPR. So that's why I'm using PPR as the base format here. These were the averages of these players. On average, they needed 10.76 targets per game, 7 receptions, and 0.75 or so touchdowns per game as well, paced out to a 17-game season. That's about 180 targets, 120 receptions, and 13 touchdowns. So we're talking really high-level production here, but volume is not everything, right? Some guys like Deebo Samuel 2 years ago, Tyreek Hill in years past, they've had elite seasons just simply by being efficient and playing in really good offenses. So I definitely wanted to account for that as well, because we don't want to discriminate against maybe lower volume options that are going to break off a lot of big plays or, get a lot of scoring opportunities. So I also wanted to weigh the situational factors, things like their offensive rank in points per game. So how good was their team? How good was their quarterback? What was their rank in quarterback rating and PFF passing grade? Team pass attempts, how much did they throw the ball? Highest targeted secondary option. So who was their, target competition? Offensive line rank and pass blocking. Obviously having a good offensive line definitely helps an offense out. And then their own individual talent measured by ranking yards per route run, which has been typically the most sticky statistic for wide receiver talent level over the past couple of years. And then their highest percentile achieved in reception perception, either versus man or against zone coverage. So they need to be able to beat one or both of those coverages. And Matt Harmon does a great job documenting that, and it ended up being very predictive. As you guys can see, only Demaryius Thomas, of the guys that we have data for, didn't achieve at least an 85th percentile score or better against one of man or zone. And in a lot of the cases here, these guys were great against both types of coverages. So the averages, like I said, are on the screen there. Offensive rank and points per game. On average, you needed to be in about a top 10 offense with about a top 12 quarterback and PFF passing grade. Team pass attempts, just under 600 per season. Highest targeted secondary options. So the next highest targeted receiver on your team needed to be at or around 100 targets or less. And then offensive line rank and pass blocking, about a top 10 offensive line. Top 5 in yards per route run. And on average, the highest percentile achieved by these guys against either man or zone coverage was the 92nd percentile on reception perception. So that is the framework. That is the anatomy of all these wide receivers. Now we're going to implement this data. We're going to give you guys some real actionable advice here. We're going to get into the top 36 wide receivers in Underdog Fantasy ADP. And I'm going to go 9 at a time. I won't spend too long on each guy because I don't want to, be here for like 3 hours talking about every single wide receiver. I'll kind of just speak on what needs explaining. So you guys can see wide receivers 1 through 9 in ADP on the screen right now. Again, this is from Underdog Fantasy. The sharpest draft rooms. If you guys are not playing on Underdog, definitely go check them out. Promo code FSC will get you 100% back up to $100. You can get your share of $15 million in total prizes in Best Ball Mania 4 drafts right now. And also, as a thank you for just depositing $10 on Underdog Fantasy, you will get our redraft rankings manifesto, which has all of our rankings available for you for your home league draft, as well as our weekly rankings, which will cover you for start-sit decisions in season. And all that is yours just for a $10 deposit using promo code FSE. But the wide receivers 1 to 9 in ADP, the big takeaways for me is that they all score out pretty well. Obviously, they should, because they're all going as high picks. They're all pretty much top 15, top 20 picks in ADP right now. Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase's only real concern is the other talented pass catchers around them. Of course, T. Higgins and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson are going to command some targets, but that's pretty much all that you could say against the cases for Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. In my opinion, in PPR formats, they have to be the 101 and 102 off the board. If you guys are thinking about taking Christian McCaffrey or a different player off the board before either of these two wide receivers, I'm telling you, you are making a mistake. These guys are such clean projections and have elite level ceilings. Cooper Kupp has a high volume ceiling. We've seen that back in 2021, but the risk of his offensive line not being very good, the risk of the quarterback situation being in flux with Matthew Stafford, having injury concerns, being a little bit older, and also Cooper Kupp himself coming off of a tightrope high ankle surgery makes him an avoid for me at cost, just because he's going so high in drafts. If he was going at the end of the first round, I'd probably be telling you that he has the upside to pay off on that ADP. Remember, at wide receiver, I'm okay drafting a less risky asset because I know that the wide receiver position is inherently less prone to injury, and especially when the guy coming into the season is already coming off of major surgery, it makes me a little bit more concerned, and the fact that he's 30 years old and the fact that his quarterback has back injury history and all that kind of stuff. Cooper Kupp, for me, I have him ranked down at like 107, 108, and I'm probably never going to get him there because he consistently goes off the board 104 to 106 type of area. Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs, I have ranked both over Cooper Kupp for the same reason. They're clean projections. Diggs misses the mark on very few things particularly. He pretty much has everything going for him. He's very talented. Offense is very good. Quarterback's very good. Pass attempts are pretty solid there as well. He's very good when it comes to reception perception. He has been an elite route runner over the course of his career. And Tyreek Hill, same thing. Only Tua is just worse than Josh Allen. And they don't quite throw the ball as much in Miami as they do in Buffalo. But both of those guys are studs. I think I'm absolutely willing to take both of them with a top 5 pick in PPR leagues. AJ Brown has kind of like a extremes projection because he's in a great offense. He's a very talented player. The pass volume, though, is lacking, and Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert will command some targets themselves, and I wouldn't be shocked if Devontae Smith and AJ Brown are quite close in targets, and the 170-ish targets that you need to have one of these seasons is very difficult to achieve for AJ Brown. One, because he's never done it already, and two, because he has these other talented players in an offense that'll probably be middle of the road at best in terms of overall pass attempts. So for me, AJ Brown, a little bit of an avoid as well at his current cost. I have him ranked just at the end of the first round. And these next three receivers, I would rather take over him, to be honest. CeeDee Lamb, Garrett Wilson, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. All of these guys are very young, very talented wide receivers. They project as better options than A.J. Brown, mainly because they have extreme upside. They are the clear number ones of their offense. I will have a ton of exposure to all three of these guys, currently at 10% plus across my Best Ball Mania 4 drafts on Underdog right now. If you have a turn pick in your home league and you're like, fuck, I don't have, the top 5 pick that I wanted, or I don't have the second overall pick like I wanted, I'm telling you right now, it's not a bad thing. If you pick at 10th overall, take CeeDee Lamb. In the second round, wrap back around with Amon-Ra or Garrett Wilson, and you will, be very, very set at that position. And if it's a PPR league, especially with any kind of bonuses for wide receivers, those guys can be big-time anchors for your team. So pretty much, I think that ADP has this right. Wide receivers 1 to 9, these are the 9 receivers that I have ranked in this area. A little bit different order, but I do think this is why you want to draft on Underdog, because the ADP is as sharp as you're going to see. Next, we get into wide receivers 10 through 18 in ADP. You guys can see them on the screen there. Devontae Adams, the first one that we're going to talk about, who I also have in a tier with the guys that were going at the end of the first round there. Even if you account for some risk with Jimmy Garoppolo coming off of an injury, who, by the way, appears to be healthy, no problem right now, and the offense may be taking a step back from where it was last year, and I don't think it will, because I think Josh Jacobs will eventually be back and the offense will be good. Jacoby Myers was brought in, who fits this system, and Hunter Renfrow was banged up last year, who probably will be better this year. It's really hard for me not to love Devontae Adams at his current cost, because he goes like in the mid to late second round at sometimes. One of the few elite talents that you can get outside of the first round, and even outside of the top 15 picks most of the time. At wide receiver, talent wins out like 95% of the time. And Devontae Adams showed me nothing to indicate that he is less of a talent than he was for the last 3 to 4 years of his career, when he's pretty much been a league-winning wide receiver every single year, even without Aaron Rodgers as his quarterback. He's the same route runner that he's always been, an elite route runner, probably the best in the game. According to Matt Harmon's reception perception, he definitely is. He's got his eyes on Canton. I'm sure he doesn't care that the Raiders are, maybe not going to win a bunch of games this year. He's going to do his best to make sure that they do. And also, he probably wants to get to the Hall of Fame someday. So I would not be worried about motivation. I would not be worried about Jimmy Garoppolo as long as he's healthy and practicing, which it sounds like he is. Devontae Adams is a huge steal, and do not listen to fantasy analysts that tell you that because they signed Jacoby Myers or because of X, Y, and Z that he's not a good fantasy pick this year, because he's a huge, huge value in my opinion. Next, we move on to wide receiver 11, which is Jalen Waddle, who's definitely impacted ceiling-wise by Tyreek Hill. He will be efficient. He will provide you spike weeks, but it's hard to imagine that he's a 20-plus point per game scorer without Tyreek Hill going down or extreme target concentration in this offense where Tyreek and Waddle are commanding 60% of the targets, which usually doesn't happen in the NFL. So for me, Jalen Waddle is more of a floor play on a season projection, but of course he does have a high weekly ceiling, and I would not be shocked if both him and Tyreek were top 6 wide receivers by the end of the year. It's just hard to imagine that Jalen Waddle has a higher ceiling than anybody going ahead of him as it currently stands, and especially on Underdog, it's a best ball format. He has a high weekly ceiling. In your home leagues, he might go a little bit lower than this because he's quote-unquote not the number one of his team. Chris Olave's profile here was a little bit eye-opening for me, because even if you're more optimistic on Derek Carr than I currently am, which I'm absolutely not optimistic about him, because they ran like a Stone Age pony offense in New Orleans without Sean Payton last year, and I expect that to continue. Chris Olave is not a high enough touchdown threat, catching passes from Derek Carr in an offense that I expect to be at best middle of the NFL, probably to the lower end of the NFL, nor will the offense do him really any favors overall, because I don't expect him to throw the ball a ton either. He's basically a talent bet to be a high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1, but he is a little bit of a capped ceiling. Like I said, I'm okay taking capped ceiling players, but I want to get them at a little bit more of a discount, and I want to make sure that I'm not taking them over players who I do think have high ceilings, and there's a lot of players in this area of the draft that do, like Devontae Adams at wide receiver, like the 3 quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen, and like Breece Hall and some of the other running backs that go in this area of the draft. So I have not been drafting a lot of Chris Olave. I can also group the next two guys together because they're both number twos for great offenses, Devontae Smith and T. Higgins together. Along with Jalen Waddle, they are the best number two receivers in the league. They likely don't have 20-plus point per game upside unless Jamar Chase and A.J. Brown get injured, but it's totally fine to draft these guys, in my opinion, because they have a clean 15 to 18 point per game projection. They're probably going to be back-end wide receiver ones, high-end wide receiver twos at the lowest case, and inherently, because they are wide receivers and they're young, they probably won't get injured unless it's some kind of freak issue. To be honest, most casuals won't draft these guys, and you can get a big-time discount on them. I've seen them, routinely available in sleeper drafts in like the mid-third round, and I'm totally fine, even though that they're not the number ones for their respective offenses. I think that's a great value on these players. DK Metcalf, I think he has a lot of questions. I'm not really excited about him because there's pass volume because they drafted another running back. It's Pete Carroll. He likes to run the ball. There's target competition because they drafted a first-round wide receiver and they still have Tyler Lockett. Is Geno Smith the same Geno Smith that we saw last year, or is he previous 10 years Geno Smith from the NFL? Young receiver, or it's a young offensive line as well. We don't know how that's going to gel. PFF ranked it as like a bottom 10 offensive line heading into the season. He's definitely talented and he can definitely score touchdowns, but DK Metcalf presents a lot of unnecessary risk for me that I'm probably just not willing to take. I would rather take the number twos that I just talked about. I would rather take a shot or an upside swing on like Travis Etienne or Jahmyr Gibbs at running back, and also, maybe a Lamar Jackson or a Mark Andrews in the onesie positions. So for me, not drafting a ton of DK Metcalf either. Calvin Ridley is one of the most mispriced options in all of fantasy land, and he was on the thumbnail of this video. If you guys didn't understand, who it was, he was blurred out. It was Calvin Ridley. And the reason is because he is one of the few guys in a sharp ADP room like Underdog Fantasy that I think is egregiously mispriced. I've accounted for the fact that he hasn't played in a while by giving him some concern in terms of his like injury suspension level. And also the fact that he might not see an elite level target share because there's other weapons there with Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram and some of those guys. But he's been up near 10 targets per game in his peak days with Atlanta, and that was with Julio Jones on the field. Great quarterback play, heavy passing offense in Jacksonville there. He's the clear number one for this team. Miss me with Christian Kirk. He's a good player, but he's not as good as Calvin Ridley. Evan Ingram's a good player, but he's not going to dent Calvin Ridley's target share. Elite reception perception numbers over the past couple years, especially against man coverage, but also against zone coverage, which is like 70% of the time what you see in the NFL. He's the whole package, and he's being faded for the fact that he hasn't played in like 2 years. He's out of sight, out of mind. I'm telling you right now, I have Calvin Ridley ranked up near Jalen Waddle and Devontae Adams, and I think it should be consensus, and it's not right now. So definitely take advantage of Calvin Ridley's ADP, especially in your home leagues. You'll probably be able to get this guy with like your fourth pick, and that's absolutely ridiculous because he has every bit the ceiling that most of the top 10 wide receivers that I talked about had. So Calvin Ridley, definitely one of my favorite values in drafts right now. Amari Cooper is boom bust. Even if you're bullish on Deshaun Watson like I am, I think that Deshaun Watson bounces back. His talent level is so inconsistent. Amari Cooper year over year can be a great wide receiver, a disappointing wide receiver, as documented in reception perception. He's not quite the level of route runner that a lot of people assume. He's dealt with nagging injuries over the past couple of years, and that affects his play on the field, and he's unlikely to have this kind of ceiling with Elijah Moore, with Donovan Peoples-Jones, with David Njoku, who are all capable target earners. I know it doesn't seem like it, but Donovan Peoples-Jones had like 100 targets last year, and I can make the argument that Elijah Moore can have 100 targets, David Njoku could have upwards of 100 targets as well. Plus, Nick Chubb is the engine of this offense, and I expect him to run the ball a ton this year. So Amari Cooper is a little bit risky for my liking, a little bit more boom bust in this area of the draft, but if you can get him at a discount, I suppose he's not bad. And then Deebo Samuel is kind of similar because he's a difficult bet because he has like the weirdest path to an elite season we've ever seen because he got so much rushing work and so much good efficiency. But the target competition since his 2021 elite season has increased, as has the carry production as well, because they have Christian McCaffrey now. Brandon Ayuk was in the doghouse for half that season, and Elijah Mitchell was dealing with injuries that year, as was George Kittle. So if everybody's healthy on this 49ers offense, I don't think Deebo Samuel has, a top 5 ceiling anymore. I think he has good bet for wide receiver 2 production, but I do think he's more of a floor play than a ceiling play, which is weird, talking about Deebo Samuel, who has routinely been kind of like the ceiling play of all ceiling plays. But I don't love Deebo Debo Samuel at his current price tag. Like I said, I would rather take a shot on like Etienne or Gibbs if I'm looking for a ceiling, or like a Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews type there as well. Next, we get into wide receivers 19 through 27. I will kind of skim through this one really fast. This range is when the elite ceilings really start to drop off, and that's okay, right? Like I said, with wide receivers, if you're drafting them in like round 4, round 5, round 6, where a lot of these guys are going, it's okay that they don't have a wide receiver 1 or a top 5 or a top 3 ceiling. You're basically just looking to fill out your like wide receiver 3 or your flex spot at this point in time, and if they have a high-end wide receiver 2 ceiling, that's definitely okay. Keenan Allen and DeAndre Hopkins are two guys that have good ceilings in theory because of what they've done over the course of their careers, but I have noticed a bit of a drop-off in their play, and they have increased injury concern entering year 10 of their career, which has typically been a drop-off season for wide receivers in the past. I've been wary of drafting both of these guys. I don't have a lot of exposure to them, and I think you guys should be as well. Jerry Jeudy, Christian Watson, and Drake London, all three of these guys are boomer bust type of bets who have nice ceilings, but unless Denver, Green Bay, or Atlanta are suddenly these like elite passing offenses that I'm sure none of you guys are projecting, I'm not really projecting either, we're probably talking about absolute ceiling back-end wide receiver 1s, high-end wide receiver 2s for Jeudy, for Watson, and Drake London. I would say of these three offenses, the best one that has a chance to be really good is Denver and Jerry Jeudy, but I also do have concerns about the Denver Broncos offense. So those guys are a little bit more boomer bust, probably don't have the elite ceilings that we need, but that doesn't make them bad picks. They're still fine 4th, 5th round picks if you guys already have some ceiling plays in your first 3 rounds. So then we have Terry McLaurin and DJ Moore, who are just basically the poster childs for don't have a top 5 ceiling and probably never will. They're great receivers, don't get me wrong, but quarterback play, pass volume, their own talent potentially will hinder their ability to have an elite ceiling. They're good projections for wide receiver 2s, but I probably wouldn't be expecting massive ceilings out of Terry McLaurin and DJ Moore unless you're expecting a huge ceiling out of Sam Howell and Justin Fields from a passing perspective, not from a rushing perspective. If they're better than we expect as passers, then it's possible that Terry McLaurin and DJ Moore have top 15, top 12, top 5 ceilings, but I'm not expecting that to be the case. And then finally, we'll skim through the wide receivers 28 to 36 range here. I would say of this group, Ayuk presents the highest ceiling, but he likely needs some kind of injuries to happen for him to command like an elite workload, an elite target share, because George Kittle is there, Christian McCaffrey is there, Debo Samuel is there, and yeah, the offense is going to be really good, and he could punch in like 10 to 12 touchdowns. It's just hard for me to get to Brandon Ayuk being anything more than like a high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1, which again, it still makes him a good pick. It just means he doesn't have an elite level ceiling. Deontay Johnson, Chris Godwin, Marquise Brown, and Tyler Lockett in this area are all clean projections as well. They don't have higher ceilings than probably high-end wide receiver 2s, which is totally fine in this range. But between Deontay, Godwin, Marquise, and Lockett, you're getting, 25% target share wide receivers that can give you, high-end wide receiver 2 production, have 130 targets, 1,100 yards, and 6 touchdowns on the season. You're just probably not getting the elite ceiling that we're looking for in this specific exercise. But if they're your wide receiver 3, your wide receiver 4, one of your flex plays, I'm totally cool with that at their current value. And then Jackson Smith and Jigba, Michael Pittman, Mike Evans, and Jahan Dotson in this area. They all have too much target competition, quarterback question marks, pass volume question marks. I probably wouldn't be expecting much more than low-end wide receiver 2s from these guys. JSN and Dotson have a little bit of the unknown factor to their game because they're young receivers. In JSN's case, he's a rookie. But without injury, it's tough to imagine them, being the number 1s for their team. I don't think that Jahan Dotson's likely to beat out Terry McLaurin as the number 1, and I don't think that JSN is likely to beat out DK Metcalf as the number 1 at least this year in the NFL. So those two guys, maybe not the highest ceiling options, but again, doesn't make them bad picks, just not the highest ceiling type of players. So this will outline my draft strategy. You guys can see I have scored these players based on, what metrics they ranked good in, and they got like 5 points for green metrics, 3 points for yellow metrics, -1 for any question marks, and then -3 for definitive no's. And this kind of outlines my wide receiver strategy this year. These early round wide receivers, I want to get at least 2 of them if I can, if not at least 1 of them. Ideally I start my draft with like Tyreek in the first round, swing back around, take Tony Pollard in the second round, and then I get Calvin Ridley in the third round. Or maybe I grab CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra St. Brown at the turn, and I get Travis Etienne in the third round or something like that. Either way, I want bullets in these early round wide receivers because I do think they have high ceilings, especially CeeDee Lamb, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Garrett Wilson, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. All 5 of those guys are ranked slightly higher for me than the consensus has them right now on Underdog, and even more so when it comes to like home league ADPs. And I love the number twos, right? Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, and T. Higgins. I will draft a higher upside quarterback or running back if I'm forced with that decision, like I said. Like if I'm deciding between Breece Hall and Devontae Smith, I'll probably take Breece Hall. Or if I'm deciding between like Josh Allen and Jalen Waddle, I'll probably take Josh Allen. But I do love these guys as pretty solid projections, back-end wide receiver ones, like I said. Calvin Ridley will easily be my highest rostered wide receiver in the early rounds by the end of the summer. He is on the thumbnail of this video because I firmly believe he is the next league-winning wide receiver, has the chance to be the highest win rate wide receiver, the next Cooper Kupp, whatever you want to call him, especially knowing that you could get him with like a third or a fourth round pick. If he ends up being a top 3 wide receiver, a top 5 wide receiver, that is going to be a pick well spent, and I think it's very much in the range of outcomes. Don't overthink Calvin Ridley. He's a great receiver. He's in a great offense that passes the ball a ton, throws the ball a lot in the red zone. Calvin Ridley could be awesome this year. Keenan Allen is listed yellow, but honestly, I don't want to overexpose myself to him. So kind of he doesn't really match up with how he scored as far as like my opinion of him. But this did make me a little bit higher on him than I probably was before. DeAndre Hopkins, Michael Pittman, and JSN right now are my firm fades at their current cost. Everyone else is kind of just like boom or bust. DK Metcalf, Amari Cooper, Deebo Samuel, Jerry Jeudy, Christian Watson, Brandon Ayuk, and Drake London all kind of fit in that boomer bust range. Probably don't have top 3 or top 5 ceilings, more so like back-end wide receiver 1 ceilings, but, you know, to each his own. Whichever one of those guys you like, I think are probably fine. And then there's also like floor plays like Chris Olave, Terry McLaurin, DJ Moore, Mike Williams, Christian Kirk, Hollywood Brown, or Tyler Lockett. So that is basically my wide receiver strategy from top to bottom in the early rounds. In the first like 5 to 6 rounds or so is where all these guys are going in ADP. If you enjoyed this video, if you feel like you got some value from it, if you learned something from this video, leave a like down below. Really helps us out, so we really appreciate it. And if this is the first time you're checking us out, I promise you're going to want to hit that subscribe button because we are going to be bringing you everything you need to bring home the championship in your home league drafts and your underdog drafts, whatever kind of fantasy you're playing this season. You're definitely going to want to stick around here at Fantasy Stock Exchange. So hit the subscribe button, leave any of your comments down below. I'll be happy to discuss some of my ratings, and you know, everything was subjective pretty much that I did in this video, but I hope I documented my thought process and outlined why I'm doing certain things. So I'm happy to have some conversations in the comments. And again, if you want to take this advice directly into action, go get some shares of Calvin Ridley, go get some shares of CeeDee Lamb and Adams and Diggs and all these guys. Head on over to underdogfantasy.com, and when you sign up using the promo code FSE, you'll get 100% back up to $100. And if you deposit just $10 on Underdog Fantasy using that promo code, you will get access to our Redraft Rankings Manifesto 2.0, which has all of our positional rankings, all of our tiers, all of our, last year's points per game numbers and how players finished, our FSE versus consensus, so you can see which players me and Danny are higher on versus Underdog ADP versus Fantasy Pros ECR, which is more in line with like casual home leagues. And that is all available on in our Redraft Rankings Manifesto 2.0, as well as a printable cheat sheet that you can print off and bring to your draft or use directly there on the manifesto itself. And that can be yours for just signing up on Underdog using the promo code FSE with $10, or you can get it on flockfantasy.com using the promo code FSE as well. We'll get you 30% off, and if you sign up annually, you get 6 months for free and a free Zoom consultation with yours truly. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.